is the old covenant, while the promise is the new covenant. There was a promise long before the law. That promise is the New Testament before the old covenant. So the New Testament is older than the old covenant. The old covenant is younger than the New Testament. The New Testament predated the Old Testament. Please follow me. The New Testament predated the Old Testament. The Old Testament is younger than the New Testament. That's why I told you it's not books. And I'm going to explain in a few minutes. So which came first? The New Covenant or the law? The New Covenant. But you won't see that reading the Bible like a carnal man. You will have to read the Bible with the aid of the understanding of the context of the book. The promise came first, and then it was confirmed. What do you mean by confirmed? 430 years of the law cannot disannul the promise. 430 years of the law cannot disannul the promise of God in Christ, which predated the law of Moses. How was it confirmed? Now please follow me. Let's deal with the word a promise first. That promise is a self-guaranteed commitment. A promise is a self-guaranteed commitment. God gave a commitment, and that commitment was guaranteed by nobody. A man was not required to fulfill that commitment. So that promise was a self-fulfilling promise. The Greek word epangelia. Epangelia means a promise I make that only I will fulfill. A self-fulfilling promise. But the law guaranteed by their conduct. If you do this, you will be blessed. If you don't do this, you will not be blessed. If you watch places like Deuteronomy 28, blessed shall you be in the city, blessed shall you be in the field, if you shall observe to do according to all that is written. If you do not observe to do according to all that is written, these curses shall come on you. That is the spirit of the law of Moses. That is not the covenant of God in Christ before the law. That is not the covenant of God in Christ before the law. Please pay attention. So now, the promise was confirmed not by works. Not by works. Watch. Hebrews chapter 6 verse 16. Hebrews chapter 6 verse 16. I'm loving this. For men verily swear by the greater, and an oath for confirmation is to them an end of all strife. 17. Wherein God, willing more abundantly to show unto the heirs of promise the immutability of his counsel of promise, the immutability of his counsel, confirmed it by an oath. Next verse. That by two immutable things, in which it was impossible for God to lie, we might have a strong consolation who have fled for refuge to lay hold upon the hope that is set before us. Now look at verse 18 again. By two immutable things, it was impossible for God to lie. That is, by two unchanging things. He gave a promise and he confirmed it by an oath. God gave a promise and he confirmed it by an oath. Look at Hebrews 6:13. Hebrews chapter 6 verse 13, the same context. For when God made promise to Abraham, because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself. Because he could swear by no greater, he swore by himself. So that means the promise of God to Abraham was not based on Abraham's performance. Because God made promise to Abraham that only God will fulfill. You know, in this business, it is all God to God. He makes the promise, he fulfills the promise. Man is just a beneficiary of the promise of God fulfilled by God in man's interest. But the law is a conditional promise that is dependent on man's performance. Dependent on man's performance. And nobody is able to keep the law. Because the law has a strict regulation. You break one, you break all. So since you can't meet the demands of the law, you become a victim of the law. That's why Romans says, for what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh. What the law could not do. The law was a fine faulter. Finding fault with them. The law of Moses. Please stay with me. The law of Moses. So, Evangelia is God making a promise that he himself will fulfill, that is not based on a man's performance. The law is do this, do that, and you will be blessed. You draw nigh, I draw nigh. You don't draw nigh, I don't draw nigh. If you shall hearken and do, I will bless. If you shall not hearken and do, you will be cursed. That's the law of Moses. And there are pastors, that's the line of their preaching all the time. They put their people under bondage. They tell, if you don't do this and this and that, you cannot be blessed. If you don't do this and this and that, you cannot be blessed. So they create a picture of a God as a contractor that needs mobilization before he does something.